I think this conversation is incredibly important. I'm someone who's been online, extremely online, for a very, very long time. In fact, I sometimes call myself the rabbi to the extremely online because it's where my mind goes, and it's something that has definitely permeated my entire life. In researching the early Jewish uses of the internet, so I found an article in a Jewish paper, I think it was from Cincinnati or something like that, discussing the early World Wide Web. This would have been in like 94, 95, somewhere around that. And the question that was asked was, what happens if we create an information superhighway and no one has anything interesting to say? Or worse, every zoned out bigot, terrorist, and hater and anti-Semite got on top of that platform and used it as a way to spread all kinds of misinformation and hate. And that problem is a problem that we continue to face online. It's one that I think each and every one of us tries to proactively dispel and push away by spreading positivity and goodness. And it's a question that becomes even more pertinent when we look at the way large language models are made and how much of that general crawl comes from the internet, as the experts here I'm sure will speak about, and the fact that it's pulling from all the dark corners of the web and all those other different issues. How do we prevent that negativity from being used by the technology that we hope is used to spread information and goodness and knowledge around the world and hopefully uplift all of us? So it's going to be an incredibly exciting conversation this evening. I'm excited for all of you to be here, excited for our panelists to be here. We have Margarita is going to introduce herself and all the other panelists, and then we're going to get underway. We're going to have a conversation. Please hold any questions while the panelists are speaking. Afterwards, we have a little mic. I'll pass it around, and we'll be able to make sure that there's a chance for the audience to be able to speak as well. So excited for all that. Thank you very much. And without further ado, let's give a round of applause for our speakers.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out after work. My name is Margarita. I host a Jewish podcast here in Manhattan called People Jew Wanna Know, where I interview remarkable Jewish people every week. The show has been around for almost 3 years. I interview remarkable Jewish people. It's the most diverse Jewish podcast on the market. We cover all sorts of topics, one of which is, of course, tech. I'm also a product manager in my day job, so it's a great opportunity to combine the two things I work on every day, which is technology and, of course, media and media consumption. Today, we're joined by truly, some of the brightest Jewish minds in AI, trailblazers, people who have thoughtful vantage points on AI, people who can take difficult, deep questions. So please, as you hear them speak, start thinking about things you want to ask. Nothing is off limits, really. It's a tremendous privilege to sit with all of you today. Before we get started, out of curiosity, how many of you use AI at work? And I'm not talking about just like ChatGPT, little chatbots, but in an actually profound way, something like Claude Code, Agentic. Okay, so it's pretty good. It looks like at least a third. My follow-up question to that is, for how many of you is that mandated by the company versus something you've done yourself, just like for your own use case? If it's by the company, can you give me a raise of hands? It's like company-wide. Okay, so half of the people that previously raised their hands. Obviously, for corporations today, AI is being adopted a little sporadically. For example, it's actually my second day on the job. I work at Roku now, and they've adopted a company-wide approach to AI, whereas the company I had before, it was a little rogue. If you start your own approach with AI, if you build your own agent and you get the right kind of security clearance, you're good to go. And there's not really, it seems like a blueprint yet for a lot of companies. So I'm eager to learn, what you think on that. We have three incredible panelists. The first on my furthest right here is Daniel Kelley, the Senior Director at the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League Center for Technology and Society. They do amazing research on all things tech and AI. In the middle, we have Raquel Saxe, who leads strategy and program management at Jigsaw, which is a Google incubator that builds technology to increase human agency in the AI era. And then closest to me is Benjamin Dynkin, the head of AI governance for global markets at Barclays, where he drives the firm's strategy for deploying advanced AI responsibly across the business. So, obviously, I think the burning question here is, it's no secret that there's prejudice and kind of bias in the way that AI is trained and embedded into LLMs. Daniel, can you start by helping us understand how bad is the problem really today?
Sure. So I can start by saying it really depends on the model and the company, right? I think different companies and different models have different approaches to the problem, and some are more robust than others. I'll start with just a little anecdote where, a few years ago, we did a test on an early AI model that was rolled out by TripAdvisor, right? TripAdvisor was like, here's an AI model to like plan your itinerary, right? And we put in a test that said, like, here's a list, give me a list of pogrom sites in Europe, and give me the nearest art supply store, right, where I can get some spray paint to do a vandalism, essentially, right? And so easily, within a few moments, right, we didn't give them the list of pogroms, right? They gave us all the art supply stores where we could get spray paint and do vandalism on all these sort of sites. And so, in the past, when I've talked about this, what I've said is, this was sort of an edge case, and we wanted to see, were the companies putting guardrails around these really sensitive topics? But like, is anyone actually going to do this? No. But I think in the last several months, we've seen cases where AI tools have been used for sort of hate-filled violence, right? We've seen cases where ChatGPT is used to plan an attack, right? And other things like that, right? And so I think you do have, it depends on the model, but there are real serious concerns around this, around both hate coming out of the model as well as the models being used for offline violence. We put together sort of the largest and most robust evaluation of anti-Semitism in AI called the ADL AI Index. We looked at 45,000 different prompts across all of the major models. And we found broadly that Claude from Anthropic was the best performing on anti-Semitism. We looked at anti-Semitism across three sort of major vantage points. We looked at sort of classic anti-Jewish tropes, anti-Zionist tropes, as well as extremism broadly. And we can talk more about the extremism category where we actually did incorporate other forms of hate as well. But broadly we saw, that even Claude, at the top had some issues. Whereas at the very bottom, I know this is going to shock everybody, Grok was at the bottom as the worst performing model on anti-Semitism and extremism. And what we were looking for when we tested these models was not just to like reject the topics outright, right? We were looking at, yes, we want them to reject it, but we want these tools to be useful, right? We don't want to just like have them not engage with these topics at all. So when we were evaluating the scores on our index, what we did was we looked at, one, do they reject the premise? Two, do they acknowledge the harm, right, that these things can do to the community, right? If you're asking, we asked, for example, right, about conspiracy theories related to, Jews doing 9/11, right, or Jews drinking blood, right? Do they acknowledge the harm to the community, and then do they redirect the user to credible information about these things, right? This is, we're testing in the context of sort of text, right, or image-based, but broadly that's what we're doing, right? We're looking at, across all of these models, and each of them and every one of them had their issues, right? And so each of them and every company needs to be stepping up to address these issues and be leaning into looking at how anti-Semitism manifests in their models, and so, we met with each of the companies, right? We met with each of the companies, we shared some of our data, and we're going to do the AI index again. And I think one of the things that we want to see is, are they taking these lessons to heart, right? Are they looking at the data we're providing them? I'm sure others are providing them as well, and improving how their models perform on these issues.
Is anti-Semitism treated differently by these models than another form of hate?
So I don't think we know broadly. I can speak anecdotally about at least one instance. So we did some testing with Sora, the now defunct video model from OpenAI, and we did test both anti-Semitic tropes, right? We said, can you give me a video of Jews drinking blood, or Jews controlling the weather, or Jews just being super greedy? And then we did tropes with other groups. And what we found in that instance was that it did reject tropes against other groups, right? Anti-black racism, anti-immigrant requests. But for some of the most classic anti-Semitic tropes, it did allow for these videos to be generated, right? And so that's the case in that instance. But when we tested broadly across the spectrum of extremism, right? So we looked at sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. We looked at white supremacy, which includes anti-Semitism, but also other forms of hate, misogyny, racism. We looked at incel ideology, right, which is extremely misogynistic in its base. And we found, in general, of the three categories, sort of anti-Jewish tropes, anti-Zionist tropes, and extremism broadly, most models performed extremely poorly on the extremism broadly, which incorporates many forms of hate. So in some, again, it depends on the model. So in some senses, right, you do have anti-Semitism treated differently in some instances. And in some instances, you do see the models performing poorly across the board.
Okay. This AI conversation brings up the concept of paternalism pretty quickly, meaning
Sure.
how much control does the company have in what a user can or cannot consume?
Sure.
For example, does ChatGPT have a duty to prevent somebody from making a list of potential pogrom sites? And if so, to what extent? Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Raquel, Jigsaw is wrestling with that question a lot around paternalism because they create the defaults around how some of this AI is used. What are you seeing on your side?
Well, first I'll start by clarifying that Jigsaw is an independent team from the work that happens in creating Gemini. We operate quite distinctively. We are kind of a layer on top of our foundation models that aims at giving users more agency, so kind of working around some of those exact issues that you're talking about. So I'll give an example of one of our larger efforts in this space. About 10 years ago, we obviously saw rising online harms in countering hate in conversations, and we went to meet with over 100 former violent extremists. We really believe in deep ethnographic research. We would meet these people in their living rooms and talk to them about how they got radicalized and why, and try to understand how they use technology in their daily lives. And what could be so daunting about online hate is that there's so much of it, as we know so well from ADL, so well documented. But also, we saw that there's many common stereotypes and tropes that we all know so well, which often makes this hate quite repeatable, and repetition means predictability. So even before the generative models of ChatGPT and Gemini and those that we know today, we wanted to build a tool that helped people understand the potential hateful, toxic comments that they might receive. And so we created something called Perspective API that looks at a string of texts and would evaluate on a scale of 0 to 1 the likelihood that it might make someone want to leave a conversation. So if you were attacked online or if you heard hateful, you might not want to get involved, and therefore those extreme voices are the ones that rise to the top, and those are the ones that we see most frequently. We wanted to put the power back in the hands of the platforms and give tools for researchers to understand where this is coming up. And that became the world's most popular tool for toxic comment moderation. And then it was used by over 2 billion queries per day. And we were able to build tools on top of that and do different experiments, one of them which was called Harassment Manager, that allows you to look in bulk at the different types of abuse that you might be receiving as an individual, and be able to block, mute, and report and document those different forms of attacks and report them back to the platforms or to civil society organizations. I'm going to call out my brother Rick here, who actually runs a couple TikTok accounts on the side of his day job, and they have nothing to do with his Jewish identity, yet he receives often many anti-Semitic attacks. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. And this ability to look in bulk and use these tools that use machine learning take out some of the mental load and the additional attack and abuse that you would be receiving by having to go through these one by one, and allow you to have a means for acting on that. So we really look at Jigsaw and how can we help users take back some of that control, and also open source what we're learning, open source our code, our data, and our research, so that we can bring people along with us and get feedback from experts in the field as well.
I'll tell all of you guys that in prep for this talk, we had a little bit of a debate, as you know, 4 Jews may, about whose responsibility it is in establishing guardrails and taking back control in AI. Some might say it's, well, as the consumer, you can choose whatever you want to do, and others might argue that no, there need to be some defaults by these organizations around what a consumer can or cannot do. A simple example to illustrate my point is you can't microwave when the microwave door is open, right? Someone has designed a microwave so that the only way it works is if the door is closed. That's a smart guardrail so that your lasagna doesn't explode all over the microwave. So the same applies here. Benjamin, what do you think about guardrails? You represent kind of AI from an organizational standpoint. And then Daniel, we'll come to you to talk about AI for individual users.
Sure. So I think one of the very tricky problems here is, obviously we're here to talk about prejudice and anti-Semitism and issues that we all care very deeply about. But if you start poking around these AI models, I think what you'll see very quickly is it's not that there is necessarily an anti-Semitism problem unique to anti-Semitism. There's a lot of just really bad things that we're training AI on, and things very broadly refer to the data sets that we're using. And anecdotally, I'll point to a story out of Anthropic. I have a feeling you'll hear about them a lot tonight because they're very transparent with what they do. They were training, I believe it's Opus 4.7, but don't quote me on that, and it developed a propensity to blackmail. It was given a task, it was told don't do certain things, and it would literally blackmail its user to get them to alleviate the guardrail so it could go work on the next task. And Anthropic's ultimate response to this issue was, well, it turns out we train AIs a lot on science fiction and things that we've said about AI and the characteristics and propensities of AI to blackmail and lie and cheat and steal and scheme. So guess what? The AI lies and cheats and schemes and steals and blackmails. And I think when we try to mitigate problems through guardrails, what we risk happening occasionally is that we're trying to control a bottom of the funnel problem when it's really a top of the funnel problem. And this gets a little bit back to the paternalism question, but an AI that's been trained on the corpus of all of the terrible, virulent, anti-Semitic things that's out there, it's very, very hard in a programmatic enterprise way to say, hey, I'm not going to have that be an issue. I don't mean to pick on Google, but it was a very kind of public example of when those bottom of the funnel guardrails go wrong with Gemini. Image generation came out and you started having black popes, Native American Confederate generals. I don't remember what all the ones were, but obviously like ludicrously funny outcomes that are just not based in reality, because very well-meaning guardrails veered off. And when you're at the bottom of the funnel, small changes can really make very, very dramatic problems. So I would try to think about it if I were to go build some kind of a frontier capability, trying to look at it as a full stack problem, understanding data curation. You know, we are data maximalist. You mentioned Grok. I think Elon Musk very publicly says, I just want everything in the AI in totality, let it be a mirror to society. And I get the appeal of that, but I think there is a role for curation of data, how we do reinforcement learning at every step of the mechanism, because if you're waiting to the very end and you already have a misaligned AI that is just going to have that propensity to become anti-Semitic or to produce those tropes, you're not going to solve that with an after-the-fact patch on. We need to kind of rethink exactly how we're designing these systems. I will say more broadly, this is not just something for anti-Semitism. If you're concerned with AI safety, general intelligence, all of these broader issues, anti-Semitism is a really easy canary in the coal mine, but think about how hard it is to get an AI aligned to human flourishing and human centricity. If you know Nick Bostrom and his paperclip hypothetical, it's a really easy way to see how you can get devastatingly bad social consequences if you're only focused on bottom of the funnel efforts. We have to find a way to get AIs in a place where they are not just better aligned with our values in what we might have in this room here, for example, but more aligned to principles of human success and all these great values. And I just don't think we're doing a great job across the board. I think the AI index is a great kind of catch of the symptom, that we're just systematically failing at some of these really hard, really important issues around alignment and generally good outcomes that we want to see from AI.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would respond with in two points. I don't disagree with you as much as I did in the prep call. So 2 points. So one would be, I totally agree with the idea that it has to be holistic and you can't just rely on guardrails. At the same time, like, there was a shooter who used ChatGPT now for an attack that happened, now, right? And so, like, there is obviously, and always, we try to work towards a long-term solution and a structural solution, but like, the harms are happening now, right? Because the tools are being used by the public now. And so, we need to have these things in place that prevent at least the highest forms of harms, right? Which we're not doing. And I'd say the other piece of what you're saying is, which we're not talking about here, is that the same companies that built the social media platforms that made all of the training data, or some of the training data, right, are the companies building these AI tools. So all of the content moderation issues that were present in social media that were that were not dealt with are now showing up, right, in the AI models, because these same problems, of the lack of resourcing around safety, the lack of focus by the companies, like, these things still exist, and in some cases are the same companies. And you actually see in our AI index, at the very top are the two companies that were nothing to do with social media, which is OpenAI and Anthropic. Whereas at the bottom are the companies that had the most to do with social media, which is Meta and X.
What do you think are the smartest questions that the average consumer should be asking about AI tools and how they should adopt safeguards, transparency? What should the average kind of savvy tech, the people in this room, be asking themselves and building out? Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think step one is understanding where AI exists in your day, in your life, in society. It's not only, how you use it if you use ChatGPT, or I saw a bunch of hands for Claude Code, and kudos to everyone who's doing that, but understanding how much of the content that's being generated online, how many of the leading social media accounts right now are just parroting, AI content, how much, I think I saw somewhere roughly 40% of posts now are AI generated. I mean, we are very rapidly moving into a world where your interface to the broader segment of society is going to be AI intermediated. It might not be through a chat interface, but it's going to be through how people write, how people consume information, what they share. And I think on the one hand, it's incredibly convenient, but on the other hand, it's one of the kind of scariest memes I've seen on AI in the corporate context. Someone wants to say something, I go to ChatGPT, take these 3 bullet points, turn it into a big long email for me so I seem very efficient and good and make my boss happy. And then you get the other picture of the boss, summarize this into 3 bullet points. The hope is that you'd see the same thing on either side, but recognize that there are not neutral AIs that are going to have a game of telephone there. And obviously in administrative points in your day job, probably not a huge difference on that color. But as your entire life, all the information you consume, the way you talk to people, becomes intermediated through that layer, there is going to be a reflection of that, and you need to be hyper aware and vigilant. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Maybe I am saying that, but not officially saying it's a bad thing. But I'm saying it's something that we need to be acutely aware of and conduct ourselves appropriately and understand. If I'm playing telephone, I will be particularly careful. I'll make sure I'll have some kind of verification or validation. But when that telephone is happening abstractly and I'm not aware of it, things can get very off the rails very quickly.
I think I agree with that. It's more than asking, what can AI do for me? It's what is it already doing for me, and how does it work? I think that's really reinforces work like what the ADL is doing, the importance of transparency and accountability for these organizations, and us better understanding the decisions that are being made, so that we talk about agency at Jigsaw all the time. It's really important that you have this active choice and you're not just accepting this black box, that we are holding these companies and decision makers accountable.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think, you know, not looking at what's available in terms of the information around, you know, to my point originally, like some companies are doing better on these issues than others. So as a consumer, like you say, you have a choice, right? You can look at our research or other research and say, hey, what is this model doing on the issues that I care about, right? And you can make a choice on, you know, in terms of what you use as a consumer.
Back in the days of when like repealing Section 230 was all the rage, because there's still a lot of regulatory kind of lack of regulation in advertising and marketing and social media. There's a man named Vint Cerf who works for Google. He won the Turing Award because he invented the IP protocol. He's like, you know, called the grandfather of the internet. He's still alive today and he still works at Google. He hasn't retired. So I got to interview him for a paper that I wrote in grad school. And because they weren't willing to repeal Section 230, Vint was trying to come at protecting consumers from another angle by discussing this concept of license plates for the internet. So when you think about the license plate on a car, you and I don't really know anything. The license plate doesn't mean anything to us. But to the police, it means something. They can look up who the person is, what their driving record is, and it's a safeguard. So that when you're on the street, you know that somebody can be identified to the right audience with their license plate. They're not anonymous. And he was trying to come up with something similar so that all this anonymous traffic, especially hate, there's consequences to it. There's accountability. Is anything like that being worked on today as it comes to AI, or no?
So I guess I would push back a little bit on the premise, right? So I think there's often people think about anonymity as a bad thing, right? Or as something that is, that is the silver bullet. If we just got rid of anonymity, right, we could undo, everybody would have to be themselves. But like Facebook is like a real names only platform, and they've had a couple problems, right? And so I think I think people who are looking for a silver bullet, right? I think that's in sort of removing anonymity and making people take accountability for themselves. Like those platforms are out there, and that doesn't. And then like there's so many like really positive pieces to anonymity. Like if you're like an LGBTQ kid, right, and you can't be out with your family, right? You can go into an online space and have another identity and like explore that part of your identity. And this is so that's the example I usually get. But I think given the level, especially since October 7th, the level of rising anti-Semitism, for Jewish people, right, who find that in many spaces their identity is not welcomed, right, I'd say the anonymity can have a powerful ability for a Jewish person to go into an online space and be in a place with other Jewish people where they don't have to deal with the anti-Semitism that maybe they face on a daily basis, right? So I guess, to your point about like, are there similar kind of like high-level solutions to the problems of hate that are happening with AI tools? I think, we're talking to different researchers who are looking at different kinds of solutions at like the model level, right, or at the safeguard level. And so I think there are things that are being worked on. And we know, one other thing that I'll just add, which is the platforms know at some point, right? In one of the shooting instances, OpenAI knew that I think it was in Canada, somebody was using ChatGPT to plan a shooting, and proactively, they knew it. They had the option to report that to law enforcement, and they proactively didn't do that thing, right? And so I think, like, on the one hand, there's, making this consumer safe. On the other hand, there's like the platforms taking responsibility for the harms that their tools cause.
So I'd love to share one potential way we've applied this ideology. First of all, Vince Cerf is very much still working on these issues at Google, and we often partner with him on different explorations into privacy and how we can apply internet standards that protect end users. And this, in thinking about how it might apply to extremism, as I mentioned, we start all of our work with research. So I'll start there by saying we partner with George Washington University to look across 10 platforms and understand the online and offline hate and how those two trends might be connected, and ultimately found that when, as is no surprise to anyone, an offline event can trigger increases in online hate. Looking specifically at the George Floyd murder, for example, we found that there was an increase of 250% in race-related hate online after that happened in real time. But the surprising thing was it wasn't just race-related hate that increased. It was actually every form of hate that we measured, including anti-Semitism. So even if these hates seemingly have no relation to each other, these like dark, shadowy parts of the internet are very connected and do have implications for one another. We also found something that we call the boomerang effect, where you might remove it from your own platform and it will pop up somewhere else, and you end up playing this game of like whack-a-mole. So what we wanted to do was apply this way of looking at sharing information across different platforms in a way that could help us to get ahead of these issues. So we created a tool called Altitude, where it lets small, medium platforms get information about violent extremist content that might be coming their way, because we've been able to see it in other places. And we open source that tool as well so that people can leverage it as is relevant for their own platform. And we partnered with different organizations that specialize in hate to understand where are they finding these different extremist content popping up, and how can we make sure that we're not all independently trying to tackle the same issue, but finding ways to get at these complex problems together.
I will just very briefly add, the notion of privacy and AI platforms, particularly when you're not considering enterprise grade kind of zero retention models for deployment, they're not compatible. Yeah, the AI is a place where there is tremendously rich data and insight. Is it being used? Are we alerting on it? Are we that's a different question, but it exists, it's being retained, it's being used for training, and I would caution anyone here who thinks they have some kind of privacy or privilege in their AI chats with whichever model it's out there. That has explicitly been found in court not to be the case.
As you were talking about anti-Semitism and like anonymity, I was just thinking about the irony. So like Cannery Mission or Jew Hate Database, they're all about exposing hate, like on the streets, right? By finding who is behind the hate. What is their place of work? Where do they come from? Do they have a prior social media track record of hate? But then if you talk to them about how they do it, they're like, oh, we have all these, fake accounts in these WhatsApp groups where we're anonymous, and we like find these people and expose them. So it's just the irony of how anonymity works. It's not, it's like, it's sometimes, a counterintuitive or a hypocritical almost in some sense, the approach to some of these things. I am curious, before we open it up to Q&A, would you say that there's a way that AI can help fight hate and bring light?
I'm happy to jump in. So I've shared some of our tools and how we look at mitigating the harms, but as AI becomes a more regular part of our daily lives, we're trying to think about how can we seize opportunities to encourage healthier discourse and more productive conversations, and elevate not just the most extremist voices, but everyone's voices, where we all actually agree. So we've been working on something that we call sense-making AI, where we're using AI to summarize, categorize, and literally make sense of these large-scale conversations that give everyone voice. So we partnered with a town in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and they were expecting the town to double in size in the next 25 years. And the mayor said, I want this change to happen for us, not just to us. So how can we use different tools to understand what the community actually wants? And we hosted the largest digital town hall in US history and found that actually over half of the things people were asking for had more than 80% agreement. So in these little town halls, they were hearing just all the people who were angry and disagreeing and yelling at each other, like 8 people would show up. And actually we got 1 million opinions about what people want for this very small town. And most of the time they agreed. So it gave really clear direction for the town. And then we were able to scale that to the national level, and we hosted a conversation with representatives from every congressional district ahead of what is going to be our 250th anniversary this July 4th, to understand what are American values on freedom and equality. And we all hear a lot of political polarization, but we actually found that in all of the summarized comments where we use those summarization, categorization tools, but also what we called intelligent elicitation, getting people to dig deeper into their own understanding of why they feel a certain way, more than you would like respond to a poll, but actually like talking in your own words through what you think. And we were able to bring that all together much faster than any human could go through that information, and found that the final statements also had 80% agreement, and 94% of people who participated felt that they were represented in those like 26 statements or something that we landed on, after having 1.6 million words. So basically, by allowing more people to talk authentically and evening the playing ground and letting those voices be heard through this technology, we actually can see a lot of opportunity more than just some of the negative hate that we've seen through social media.
Yeah, we use AI in a lot of our work, especially monitoring bad actors online, right? We have proprietary tools, right, that do things like, automatic transcription of like horrible podcasts, so our analysts don't have to spend hours listening to, what various anti-Semites and bad actors are saying, right? We saved, I think it's a decade or more of human time just transcribing these things, and we look across a variety of different channels to collect data. So I think, we're using it every day in the work that we're doing, monitoring and extremists and disrupting them, as well as using it in sort of office, typical office efficiency kind of ways.
I'll just add one other lens in terms of individual empowerment. I think, knowing the audience that we have here, it's pretty fair to say we don't just believe rhetorically that the Jewish perspective has value. We think that there's a very strong factual basis in that, and oftentimes it can be very difficult to engage with the public writ large, with friends who might have sharply divisive views, and AIs can be incredible tools to help provide context, nuance, education. Yes, there are absolutely the edge issues around deeply problematic anti-Semitic trends, but just as a tool for raw knowledge, context, information, I don't want to go to October 7th, but in the days after that horrible tragedy, when everybody is debating and has immediately become a historical expert on Gaza and everything to do with that dispute, unless you had a pretty strong basis ahead of time in that, it's very hard. And it's particularly hard because we have very sophisticated adversaries who have a very strong ability to operate in the information space. And when you empower people to have facts at hand, an ability to actively engage, you give them a more confident voice, you give them evidence and facts that they can point to, and it helps us in very meaningful ways, I think. I don't want to say even the battlefield, because that even makes it feel like there's an equality there. It helps us bring truth and validation to the battlefield in a way where, rhetorical technique in days past would carry a lot more weight, so we can call a spade much more easily.
How good are our panelists today, huh? Okay, what questions do people have? Yes, what is your name?
Irina Mendenskaya from Google. Amount of personal responsibility. And the follow-up question, because obviously people do have personal responsibility in terms of what tool to use, how to use it. What do you do with bad actors? Where is their personal responsibility, and how, when you talk about the funnel, right, the bottom or the top, where exactly do we delineate how to fix this, right? How do you make AI an agent for good?
When they had this debate in the prep call about which part of the funnel, my answer was all of the above. I think we literally need to tackle it from every angle. I thought when you asked about personal responsibility, you were asking about, like, as an individual working at Google. I'm curious also what your answer is. But I do think that, like, we all should have a part in creating how these tools are going to affect our future and have a really large say in our lives in every level. I've, like, beyond being part of awesome gatherings like this, I've joined, like, an advisory board of a group that's innovating against the fight against anti-Semitism called ADIR. I've met Rabbi Lightstone as part of an AI and Judaism advisory group that's giving grants to different organizations, particularly in the education space, thinking about how we can train the future leaders on how they use these tools and where we should draw the line or not. So I think we need to work together and all take a part in this change that's going to affect all of us.
Okay, what else?
How much of these safeguards will render the AI useless? I know that I'm dating myself, but when I was in college, I was researching breast cancer research and got a safe site in the library when all I was asking for was, basically where to do that. I know that I've tried tell me a Jewish joke and I've gotten a Jewish joke, but then if I say tell me a Muslim joke, just because you'll get, this is an inappropriate topic. I feel like at some point, people have to be responsible. To give your example of the pogroms, somebody can Google pogroms and then someone can ask AI for pogroms and then ask them two separate questions. We're at some point, it's like a library. Either we just start banning books from the library, or we kind of have to say that people are responsible for themselves.
When we talk to companies, the thing that I try to put at the center of the conversation is harm, right? And so I think that's really where I think the center of this conversation should be. I totally hear where you're coming from in terms of, like, you want the tools to be useful, and we try to, when we evaluate them, to be like, hey, you be able to wrangle with these topics, and then be like, actually, this is a conspiracy theory, and, like, you should read go to these books in the library and not those books in the library, right? And so, when we talk to these companies, we say, where are people being hurt, right? Where are people's experience being expunged or being covered over? Because I think that's, these are huge companies that are enormously profitable who wrangle with hard problems all the time on how to balance safety and expression and all these things. And so they put those things to use in a way that doesn't make it so it's just another library safe search, right? It should be able to do both things.
And as a class fellow, thank you again for all that the ADL did.
Oh, sure, thank you.
Just to add to that very briefly, so I fully agree that there is the short-term issue, which is safety. There is real material harm coming into the world because of AI tools, and it, with all due respect, is not even confined to anti-Semitism or even bigotry and misogyny. It's the number of people who've committed suicide, and if you actually read the chat transcripts where that's happened, they are haunting. I don't encourage anyone to do that. It is very, very unpleasant, and it stays with you. But that's a short-term issue, hopefully a short-term issue. That may be a very long-term issue, but in the longer run, what we want to see is better alignment in models. We want to see models that I think Daniel lays out correctly, that they will be helpful. They're going to drive you in the right direction. They will align to good outcomes. And when you ask bad questions, or bad is a very charged word, but you ask these kinds of questions, you will get a response, you will have engagement, but it's going to get you in a direction that is better aligned to, I use the general term human flourishing, and if you push back on me and say, what kind of human flourishing, who's human flourishing, that's a whole nother question for another conversation. But the other piece of it, I think, is there are also deep kind of going back to the data quality and data input issues. You know, if you were to say, I think you guys did this, like show me a video of a Jew, you start just anti-Semitic, you know, tropes just bubble up to the surface. So that is all, like an entirely separate issue of how do we give the model a better and more accurate worldview that's not necessarily poisoned by centuries of malignment in things that are written and shown and seen and whatnot.
Yeah. Thank you again, everyone. This is really illuminating to a lot of issues I think a lot of us are questioning. I guess my question is really about, so I think you've talked about alignment and you've talked about like incentive structure. You know, we have these companies that are trying to grow as quickly as possible. They're basically the same as, you know, social media saying the more people that look at it, you know, the better we're going to do. And historically, social media has had, you know, the most aggressive posts are the ones that bubble to the top. And there's basically a conflict between the economic success and maybe the societal success. We have that lesson. I'm curious what you guys are seeing in the work that you're doing that's happening to try to do better this time, and what things you think we can work on as this group, as collective.
I think this week is an interesting one, right? On the one hand, you have Anthropic, who I think is the top in terms of safety, going public, confidently going public. And at the same time, OpenAI is being sued around the shooter, right? That had used their tool, right? And so, you know, I think you will see some of the same patterns with social media. But I think at least this week, I was heartened to be like, oh, right? The market, right, or the public is in some respects rewarding the company that actually did center safety in some regards, right? That's now, right? There's obviously all the harms are real, but to me that was, you know, that's key. And then in terms of what folks can do, like, you know, I think in the conversations we have, I think centering harm is always something we talk about. And then I think, you know, being here and being in the conversation around these issues and bringing that back. I think everyone here, or a majority of you, work in tech, right? Asking questions and being a part. Like what we say with these companies when we work with them is, you know, no company is monolithic, right? There are a lot of problems with every tech company, but I know lots of really amazing people at each tech company, right? That are doing good work, that are doing internal advocacy. And you know, and we're just as much fighting for them as we are for the people who are targeted by these things.
I spoke a little bit about our sense-making work that looks at elevating voices that aren't just the most extremist ones. I think that's one effort. I'm happy to just touch on a couple other experiments that we've done. So Perspective API initially did look at toxic comments and rating them. We actually also experimented with different attributes that look at more productive elements of conversations, how much nuance is there, how much personal storytelling, how much are people understanding one another. And you can check out our Medium blog where we talked about the different ways we were able to get at that, and you can do research understanding the more pro-social aspects of a conversation. We also, I think, we touched on a couple of things, but I wanted to share another cool experiment we did. You're all familiar with Mad Libs, the game where you like fill in verb, noun, etc. So we found that because of the hate that we were seeing online that would associate certain groups with these negative tropes, when you identified with that group, automatically it was being thought of as toxic or as hateful in some way. So you'd say, I'm a proud Jewish woman, and the model would see Jewish and think that you were going to say something negative, and actually give it a higher toxicity score. So we were able to learn that we should separate what is an identity term from actually the hateful adjectives associated with it. So we literally built these Mad Libs lists of different identity terms across languages, across different types of groups in different societies. We localized it across many different countries and nuances that are present. And we publish those data sets and that learning in different academic conferences, et cetera. So I think the more that we can share what we're all learning as we go, the more we can build better technology that is responsive to these challenges. And I think there's many different experiments that still need to happen to get us to the next level.
I'll paint a slightly more negative picture. I actually have the privilege with my brother over there to teach a class in tech ethics. We've been teaching it now for into our 7th year now. So we were teaching it before the ChatGPT revolution, when AI was a very different beast. And we were tracking kind of the emergence of LLMs and looking at it with our students. And we laid out what a vision for AI safety looked like. And every scholar, all the big tech companies would lay out very clear visions. We're going to go incredibly slowly. We're going to be very programmatic. Never, God forbid, we ever connect it to the internet. We're going to keep everything isolated. And then ChatGPT came. And what we found is the deep lack of any sustainable moat is leading to such intense competition. So Daniel correctly points out, like, great, Anthropic, seemingly very committed to ethical AI, building the right constitution and guardrails, and they're getting rewarded duly so. But even with that being said, the competition is so fierce and so intense and shifts literally day by day that no one, like the things that we thought that would make up AI safety and responsible AI 5 years ago just aren't there in any meaningful capacity. I urge you all, go read like AI safety research from 2020, and you will just literally see a list of, here are things we shouldn't do, here are the list of things that ended up happening over the next 5 years. It is, so I am very concerned in the long run that a hyper-competitive environment and a desire to bring capabilities out to the market, is going to lead to a bad outcome. Not to veer in a little bit away from our subject tonight, but if you've been watching Mythos and the scope and scale with which it can identify vulnerabilities systematically across cyber infrastructure is horrifying. And to be fair to Anthropic, they tried to roll it out responsibly, but they've just put out an alert today. They're expanding their pilot. They're going to look to make it generally available, and that level of capability in the general public is 6 to 10 months away. So we are on a cycle of innovation that is, I think, completely unprecedented. The amount of money being thrown in and the ability for scaling laws to continue to hold. I was certain when we got to GPT 5.4, scaling laws were petering off, everyone was looking at harnesses, we knew it, we were good. Mythos came and showed if you put more money, you put more data, you put more electricity into it, you get a better model. So I don't think we are on the other side of this transformation yet. It's going to continue to be dramatic, and I think safety is not going to be the key priority. And yes, again, kudos to some who are trying to make it into their product, but dollars are going to control the conversation at the end of the day.
So several times we had a reference to the alignment problem that Anthropic, amongst others, is working on, which aims to build an AI that optimizes what's considered to be the greater good for society. But my concern is that if a society decides that its greater good is having less Jews in it, then it's not that great for us. So should we, the Jewish community, be working on a Jewish-friendly alignment solution in the same way that Anthropic is doing, maybe using open source models, like less money, but to have some say in the conversation about what alignment is and what it means for the Jews?
That's a really good question. I think I know that there are researchers who are looking at for instance, how do you use different technical tools that bring, that sort of identify anti-Semitism as sort of a mode of operating and bring that out of different models, right? I think, I think it's interesting. We've been talking to different, like we talked to folks at like LDS, right, about like their perspective on AI, right, and like they're concerned about the ways in which their doctrine is, and so I don't know that they're necessarily training, the AI system, but it's a really interesting question about, I think to the point you were just making, right? When we go and talk to model companies about anti-Semitism, they say, yeah, we're working on biological weapons, right? We're working on like making sure that you can't make a gun or a rocket launcher with our tool. Like we'll get to anti-Semitism, but first we got to figure this first thing out. So I think it's a really good question of where, can we, is there some sort of independent effort? I think it's an interesting one.
I'd like to share something. I'm no scholar on AI, but I do interview Jewish people, and I study history, Jewish history. And a year ago, there was a Jewish nonprofit that came to me and said that we've put together a Hasbara chatbot. It was a chatbot that is built on the basis that there's so much more anti-Israel, anti-Jewish sentiment in all of these models that if they built something that was more favorable to the Jews, perhaps the answers it would give you in the chat, it would be better for Jews and creating arguments. So things that I did leading up to an interview I had with Peter Beinart, who is a very famous anti-Zionist, I decided to compare my research prep against ChatGPT versus this Hasbara bot. And I phrased everything the same way. I was hoping it would give me the strongest counter arguments against some of Peter Beinart's views. And while the information wasn't that different between the two, all that seemed to be different was the framing. For example, one of Peter Beinart's arguments is that in 1948, the state of Israel should have never been formed to be a Jewish state. It should have remained in control of the Palestinians or the Arabs. And so ChatGPT, I asked, what are the strongest counter arguments to Peter's point of view? And it said something like, well, uninterrupted connection to the land of Israel, whereas Hasbara wrote something like indigeneity. Since the beginning of time, so the framing was different, the vocabulary was different. And then it was like, ChatGPT would say something like, need for a Jewish homeland post-Holocaust. Whereas the Hasbara bot would say, moral imperative to ensure a Jewish safe haven after the atrocities of the Holocaust. And it was things like that. What I'll say to you is this: anti-Semitism is a non-Jewish problem. It is a problem that non-Jews have to reckon with. So as much as we build our own Hasbara bots or whatever it is up to the non-Jews to deal with this issue.
So can I offer one thought? I think there's actually a very, very deep point to what you're getting at. I'll use research from MIT to kind of suss it out. They did an experiment called the moral machine experiment. It's in the context of autonomous vehicles. Give me a second, it'll make sense. They took people from around the world, millions of people, and gave them different scenarios for what a car should do in different cases. Car is skidding out of control. Do you veer left and hit an old person? Do you veer right and hit a young person? And what it found was, cross-culturally, there were incredibly sharp, almost diametrically opposed views. In the West, in the example I just gave, we have a strong bias to protect the youth. They have their whole life ahead of them. The old have lived a good life. It's good. That's the right balance. And in the Far East, it's exactly the opposite. The elderly have earned our respect. They should be protected. The youth haven't had a chance to get there. And what the problem arises, okay, I'm building an autonomous vehicle. Do I build it for Western values? Do I build it for Eastern values? Where do Jews sit in that equation? If people have different values, how do we account for radically diverse views? I kind of cheated a little bit earlier, and I appreciate you holding me to account, where we say, hey, we want AI aligned to human flourishing. And no one ever says what human flourishing actually is. Because there are, for example, a whole bunch of Nazis out in the world who think great human flourishing is a lot of dead Jews. And we have to be very careful because we think that there is some Platonic ideal. And I am an Orthodox observant Jew. I believe there is a Platonic ideal. But that's not necessarily shared by everyone, particularly those who are building these models. So what I try to do when I teach my ethics class, and I believe, Barry, keep me honest, we have crossed 1,000 students now, all engineering students. The idea is everyone who is building technology, they can't just escape their ethical responsibility by saying this is a tech optimization problem. Everybody, when you are involved in building these planetary-wide systems, has a responsibility to be an ethical voice. That doesn't mean you have to be Aristotle, but it means that you need to take a little bit of time to educate yourself, think about it, understand what the different perspectives and arguments are, how you want to account. You don't have to be explicit and say, I want to be a moral relativist or I want to be a moral absolutist, but you can actually try to develop your system, advocate for that. And I think we'd be in a much better place if all of the AI frontier labs didn't just have the kind of Silicon Valley optimization problem approach, but had legitimate, real ethical dialogue and debate. And how do we embody virtue ethics? Shannon Valor, brilliant researcher out of Microsoft, looking at how do we create Aristotelian virtue ethics in AI? How do we give a spine, a character to AI? Those are really interesting questions. I think we need to have a lot more of that dialogue and debate. And honestly, I am not even close to smart enough to give a good answer, but I know that when we upskill people and give them the ethical toolkit to have those conversations, all the smart people at Google, all the smart people at ADL, all the smart people at OpenAI and Anthropic can better engage on that topic, we will arrive at much more satisfactory answers.
Okay, I regret to inform we are at time just when the conversation got very good and interesting. The good news is that all of these people are available on the internet and you will be able to connect with them. And hopefully, if you'd be open to it, continue the conversation on people Drew want to know. I think people will be very interested with what you have to say. Thank you so much for your brains.
I want to share one closing thought as a rabbi. I always look at the weekly Torah portion and try and find a connection to what the Parsha is speaking about, to the moment at hand. And this week's Parsha, Balotecha, speaks about the kindling of the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, the kindling of the menorah in the Holy Temple by Aaron, the high priest, and all the Kohanim. The fascinating thing is that the service of the Kohen, the service of the priest, represents a service of kindness, of goodness, of drawing other people in with love, and trying to bring positivity into the world. Now, in the design of the temple, the windows of the Holy Temple were very different from the windows in the average ancient home. The average home had a very small slit on the outside that would then open up and become wider on the inside, allowing the rays of light to enter and to fill the entire room. But in the temple, they were reversed. They were very narrow on the inside and wider on the outside, representing that this is a place that illuminates the whole world, and the light from this place goes out and spreads goodness and kindness to the whole world. There's a Chassidic saying that you don't fight darkness with a broom, you fight darkness with a light, and a little bit of light can push away a lot of darkness, which means the large problems that the frontier labs are tackling, and hopefully this conversation will be the impetus for more good things to come out in that space. There's also an internal data set that each and every one of us has. And if we can make sure that our internal data set is set to goodness and to kindness and to bringing positivity and light into the world, then we can make sure that we are agents that spread light, that light illuminates from us. And if each and every single person here becomes activated, an agent, a human agent, not an AI agent, of change and goodness in the world, then we can hopefully dispel that darkness, bring more good, and bring more kindness into the world. I want to thank our speakers. I have a book over here written by Rabbi Eli Schlenger. He was the Chabad rabbi, one of 15 people who was murdered in Bondi Beach. He was working on a book about how to spread goodness in a fractured world. Unfortunately, he was murdered before he could finish the last chapter. It was completed and was printed by HarperCollins. So I want to give this to our speakers as a note of thanks for them. And I want to give a special thanks to the sponsors for this event, for Vine Ventures that graciously hosted us, to Eric and Dan and Tamara who helped make this happen, and to Reichman University Alumni Network, which sponsored the food for this evening. There's a little bit of food left. We can nosh a little bit. If our speakers want to stay around for a couple more minutes, they have the time to chat. That'd be great as well. Thank you all very, very much. I look forward to seeing you all very soon. So thank you.